If a king asks for your soul instead of your life, pray that he still remembers mercy. Emily Carter repeated those words silently as she climbed the final stone steps leading to Blackthorn Castle, though she could no longer remember who had first whispered them to her. Perhaps it had been an old woman in the marketplace. Perhaps it had been nothing more than another desperate story passed between people who had already lost too much. Tonight, stories were all she had left. Cold rain soaked through her worn denim jacket, dripping from loose strands of blonde hair onto the ancient stone beneath her feet. Her sneakers squished with every step after the 3-mile walk through the forest, but she barely noticed anymore. Exhaustion had become part of her life, just like unpaid bills, double shifts, and pretending everything would somehow work out tomorrow. Behind her, the distant town lights shimmered through the storm like fading stars. Ahead stood the castle that most people refused to even look at after sunset. It rose from the mountainside with black towers piercing the clouds, its countless windows glowing faintly behind sheets of rain. It looked less like a home and more like a kingdom carved from the night itself. Emily tightened her grip on the small silver necklace resting against her chest. It belonged to Lily. Her little sister had pressed it into her hand only 6 hours earlier, smiling despite the fever stealing every bit of color from her face. "You'll bring me back a miracle," Lily had whispered with complete faith, as if miracles could simply be borrowed from strangers. Emily had smiled back because younger sisters deserved hope, even when hope felt impossible. Every hospital had turned them away. Every specialist had offered another expensive test. Every doctor had eventually lowered their eyes with the same heartbreaking apology. Whatever was happening inside Lily's body wasn't something modern medicine could explain. But rumors had survived for centuries. Rumors claimed the Vampire King could cure illnesses no human understood. Rumors claimed he could rewrite fate itself. Rumors also claimed that every favor demanded a terrible price. Emily had spent weeks trying to ignore those stories. Until this morning, when Lily had stopped recognizing her for nearly 5 terrifying minutes before waking again with tears in her eyes. That had been enough. Some doors only opened after every other door had closed forever. Lightning flashed across the mountains, illuminating enormous iron gates decorated with vines and ancient symbols Emily couldn't read. Before she could knock, the gates groaned open by themselves. No guards appeared. No voices welcomed her. Only silence waited beyond. She stepped inside, her heartbeat pounding louder than the rain. The courtyard stretched wider than a football field, lined with marble statues whose faces seemed almost alive beneath the silver moonlight. Hundreds of candles burned despite the storm, their flames perfectly still. The impossible calm unsettled her more than any monster could have. As she crossed the courtyard, massive wooden doors opened without a single hand touching them. Warm air drifted outward carrying the faint scent of cedar, old books, and something strangely sweet she couldn't identify. Inside, an endless hallway disappeared into darkness beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected gold across polished black floors. Every sound of the storm vanished behind her the moment the doors closed. She suddenly realized she was completely alone. Or perhaps not alone at all. Somewhere beyond the shadows, someone was already expecting her. Emily took one careful step across the polished floor, then another, each footfall echoing through the endless corridor as though the castle itself were listening. Every chandelier above her shimmered with hundreds of candles, yet none of them flickered. Their steady light painted the marble walls in warm gold, softening a place that should have felt terrifying. Instead, the silence carried an ancient kind of patience, as if time itself moved differently inside these halls. Portraits stretched from floor to ceiling, depicting kings and queens with impossibly pale faces and calm expressions that seemed almost alive. Their silver frames caught the candlelight, while their watchful eyes appeared to follow every movement she made. Emily lowered her gaze and continued walking, reminding herself why she had come. Lily was waiting. Every second mattered. At the end of the corridor stood a pair of towering ebony doors carved with twisting branches and unfamiliar symbols that glowed faintly beneath the polished surface. Before Emily could gather enough courage to knock, both doors opened without a sound. A grand chamber unfolded before her, larger than any church she had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers floated high above polished black stone. Massive windows overlooked the storm outside, where lightning illuminated distant mountain peaks. Long banners embroidered with silver crowns hung between marble columns, and a circle of elegantly dressed nobles stood in complete silence. Their clothing resembled another century entirely, tailored coats, velvet gowns, jeweled collars, and gloves as white as fresh snow. Every face turned toward Emily the instant she entered. None of them looked surprised. It was as though they had known the exact moment she would arrive. She suddenly became painfully aware of her soaked jacket, faded jeans, and worn sneakers leaving tiny drops of rain across the immaculate floor. One woman lifted a delicate eyebrow with obvious disapproval. Another whispered something too quietly for Emily to hear, though several others exchanged knowing glances. The room remained perfectly still until a calm voice broke the silence. "You walked a long way for someone who was told this place does not exist." Emily searched for the speaker. At the far end of the chamber, beyond a series of broad marble steps, stood a throne carved from black stone unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was elegant rather than intimidating, ancient without appearing worn. Seated upon it was a man dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, whose simplicity somehow carried more authority than every jeweled noble surrounding him. Dark hair framed a face so composed it could have been carved from marble. His skin was almost impossibly pale, his posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly upon the carved arm of the throne. But it was his eyes that held her completely. They were neither cold nor warm. They carried the quiet weight of centuries, studying her with calm curiosity rather than judgment. Emily understood immediately why people called him a king. Power radiated from him without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture. It simply existed. She swallowed the nervousness tightening her throat and forced herself to meet his gaze. "My name is Emily Carter." Her voice echoed softly across the chamber. "I came because my sister is dying." No one interrupted. The nobles remained motionless. Even the storm beyond the windows seemed quieter. The king rose from his throne with effortless grace, descending the marble steps one at a time. No footsteps echoed beneath him. When he finally stopped a few feet away, Emily realized he was taller than she had expected, though nothing about him felt threatening. Instead, he carried the calm certainty of someone who had seen every human emotion imaginable and no longer feared any of them. His eyes drifted briefly toward the silver necklace around her neck before returning to her face. "Most humans who seek this castle ask for wealth," he said evenly. "Some ask for revenge. Others ask for power." He paused, studying the exhaustion beneath her eyes. "You did not ask for any of those." Emily slowly shook her head. "I only want my sister to live." For the first time since entering the castle, something almost invisible changed within the room. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Somewhere in the chamber, someone drew a quiet breath. And although the king's expression remained perfectly composed, the faintest hint of interest appeared in his ancient eyes. The silence lingered for several long seconds after Emily spoke, stretching across the grand chamber until it felt heavier than the storm outside. She resisted the urge to look away. Every instinct told her to lower her eyes before the ancient king, standing only a few feet away. But she thought of Lily lying in their tiny apartment with fading strength, and courage became easier than fear. King Lucian Ashford regarded her with quiet patience, as though he were listening to far more than the words she had spoken. His silver eyes lingered on her face, searching for something, hidden beneath exhaustion and worry. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me about your sister." Emily released a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. "Her name is Lily. She is 16. She used to laugh all the time. She loved painting flowers on old notebooks because we could never afford real canvases. 3 months ago, she became sick. Every week, she grows weaker. Sometimes she forgets who I am for a few minutes. Then she remembers and pretends nothing happened because she does not want me to worry." Her voice trembled for the first time. "She deserves a future. She deserves birthdays and college and everything I never had." No one interrupted. Even the nobles who had looked at her with open disdain now remained strangely still. Lucian folded his hands behind his back and slowly walked toward one of the towering windows overlooking the mountains. Lightning illuminated the valley below before fading once more into darkness. "The illness you describe is not human," he said quietly. "It is older than your history books, older than your oldest cities." Emily stepped forward without thinking. Then you can save her. Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face the gathering of nobles. Can I? He asked calmly. Murmurs spread through the chamber like wind moving through leaves. An elderly noble with silver hair stepped forward, dressed in a crimson coat embroidered with black thread. His sharp features carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. He bowed respectfully before addressing the king. Your Majesty, there are ancient laws. Humans cannot simply request royal intervention whenever tragedy enters their lives. Several others nodded in agreement. A woman wearing a sapphire gown added, if word spreads that the crown grants miracles, every desperate soul will climb these mountains. Emily felt her hope slipping away. She had expected refusal. She had prepared herself for rejection. Yet hearing strangers calmly debate her sister's life felt colder than the rain outside. Lucian remained expressionless. The laws exist for a reason, he replied. But so does compassion. The room fell silent again. The silver-haired noble looked genuinely surprised by the answer. Emily watched the king carefully. Beneath his composed exterior, she sensed someone weighing every possibility with extraordinary care. Nothing about him suggested cruelty. Nothing suggested kindness either. Only responsibility. He turned back toward her. Every cure requires balance, he said. Nothing valuable is ever taken from the world without something equally valuable replacing it. Emily already knew where the conversation was leading. She had accepted that truth before beginning the journey to the castle. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and removed the only object she had carried besides Lily's necklace. It was an old photograph, its corners worn from years inside her wallet. Two smiling sisters stood together beneath summer sunshine at a county fair, holding melting ice cream cones and laughing at something beyond the camera. Emily looked at the picture for only a second before offering it toward Lucian. She is everything I have. The king accepted the photograph with surprising gentleness. His eyes rested upon the smiling faces for several quiet moments before he returned it. And what? He asked softly. Are you willing to give in return for everything? Emily did not hesitate. She lifted her chin and answered with complete certainty. Anything. The word echoed through the chamber like the ringing of an ancient bell. Several nobles inhaled sharply. One quietly whispered, "She does not understand." Another slowly shook his head. Yet none of them spoke louder than the king, whose calm voice carried effortlessly across the hall. Be careful, Emily Carter. His gaze never left hers. The oldest promises are never made lightly, and once spoken before this throne, they cannot be taken back. Emily never looked away. The warning hanging in the air should have frightened her, yet the image of Lily's tired smile remained stronger than every fear inside the castle. I have already decided, she answered quietly. If my future can become her future, then I do not need another choice. A whisper rippled through the chamber. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances, while others studied Emily with something that almost resembled pity. King Lucian remained perfectly still. His expression revealed nothing, but his ancient eyes seemed to measure every heartbeat inside the room. At last, he descended the final marble step until only a few feet separated them. Most humans bargain with emotion, he said. They promise anything because they believe impossible prices will never be collected. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. When the moment arrives, they beg to change their minds. Emily slowly shook her head. Then I will not ask to change mine. For the first time, the corners of Lucian's lips moved ever so slightly. It was not quite a smile. It was recognition, as though he had finally found an answer to a question no one else knew existed. He extended one pale hand toward her. Then let the court witness your decision. Emily hesitated only long enough to steady her breathing before placing her hand into his. His skin felt unexpectedly warm, not cold as every legend had claimed. A faint silver glow spread beneath their joined hands, flowing across the polished floor in delicate patterns like moonlight reflecting on water. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. One noble stepped forward immediately. Your Majesty, stop this. It was the silver-haired advisor from earlier. His voice carried genuine concern. The covenant has not been performed for centuries. Another council member added, the old laws forbid unnecessary royal bonds with humans. Lucian never released Emily's hand. The laws forbid reckless promises, he replied evenly. This one has purpose. The glowing symbols circling their feet slowly climbed the marble steps before disappearing into the walls themselves, as though the castle had quietly accepted the moment. Emily looked down in amazement. She had expected pain. She had expected something terrifying. Instead, she felt only an unusual sense of calm settling over her heart. Lucian studied her expression carefully. "There will be no exchange of your soul tonight." Emily blinked in surprise. The room erupted with confused whispers. Even the council appeared stunned. "What?" she asked softly. Lucian released her hand. "Because your soul cannot be purchased." Silence crashed over the chamber. Emily stared at him, unable to understand. "Then why did you allow me to come here?" she asked. "Because your willingness to sacrifice everything has already proven something far more valuable." He paused before continuing. "I will heal your sister." Emily's breath caught. Tears immediately filled her eyes, but before she could speak, Lucian raised one hand. "In return, you will remain within this castle until your sister has fully recovered." Emily nodded without hesitation. "I agree. There is only one rule." His voice became quieter, yet every person in the chamber seemed to hear each word with perfect clarity. "Never lie to me." Emily frowned slightly. Of all the conditions she had imagined, that had never crossed her mind. "That is all?" she asked. "That is everything," Lucian answered. "The moment you knowingly speak a falsehood to me, the covenant ends, and every protection it grants disappears." Before Emily could ask another question, warmth spread gently across the inside of her left wrist. She looked down as a delicate silver symbol slowly appeared beneath her skin, resembling intertwined branches surrounding a tiny star. At the exact same moment, an identical mark shimmered briefly beneath Lucian's wrist before fading beneath his sleeve. The chamber froze. Several nobles stepped backward in visible disbelief. The silver-haired advisor's face lost every trace of color. A woman in sapphire whispered almost soundlessly, "That mark, it should not exist." Lucian lowered his sleeve without the slightest hint of surprise, but for the first time since Emily had entered Blackthorn Castle, something ancient flickered behind his calm eyes. It was not fear. It was recognition. Somewhere deep within the castle, a great bronze bell rang once by itself, its solemn echo rolling through stone corridors that had stood for hundreds of years, announcing to every soul beneath the mountain that something long forgotten had awakened. The deep echo of the bronze bell continued rolling through Blackthorn Castle long after the sound itself had faded, leaving behind a silence unlike any Emily had experienced before. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind that carried history, secrets, and expectations too ancient to be spoken aloud. The nobles remained frozen where they stood, their eyes fixed on the fading silver mark beneath Emily's wrist. No one seemed willing to become the first person to speak. Finally, the silver-haired advisor stepped forward once more. His measured composure had vanished, replaced by unmistakable concern. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the Covenant Bell has not answered a royal agreement in nearly 400 years." Lucian looked toward the advisor without the slightest change in expression. "I heard it." "Then you understand what this may mean." The advisor lowered his voice. "If the old records are correct, the mark chooses only under circumstances beyond our control." Lucian answered with calm certainty. "Then perhaps it is time we stop pretending we control everything." Emily listened to every word, understanding almost none of it. She glanced once more at the delicate silver symbol resting beneath her skin. It no longer glowed, yet it felt strangely warm, almost comforting. She looked back toward the king. "I still do not understand what happened." Lucian's gaze softened just enough to ease the worry in her voice. "Neither do I." That simple admission surprised nearly everyone in the chamber. The vampire king did not sound uncertain. He sounded honest. Several nobles exchanged uneasy looks. If even Lucian Ashford did not recognize the meaning of the mark, then something far older than the kingdom itself had entered the castle tonight. Before anyone could continue the discussion, enormous doors opened at the opposite end of the hall. An elderly physician wearing a charcoal gray coat entered with quiet urgency. His silver hair was neatly combed, and a leather medical case rested beneath one arm. He bowed respectfully before the throne. "Your Majesty, preparations have been completed." Lucian nodded once. "You have confirmed the girl's sister?" "Yes. Our healers have already located her through the royal network." She remains at Saint and Community Hospital exactly where your messengers expected. Emily's heart skipped. She is alive? The physician smiled kindly. Very much so. Relief washed across her so suddenly that her knees nearly gave way. She steadied herself with a slow breath as tears blurred her vision. For the first time in weeks, hope felt real instead of imagined. Lucian noticed the change immediately. She will receive treatment before sunrise. Emily whispered, "Thank you." The king inclined his head ever so slightly, accepting the gratitude without seeking it. Then he turned toward the physician. "Ensure every expense is covered anonymously. Her caregivers must believe the resources came from a charitable medical foundation." Emily looked at him in surprise. "Why anonymously?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "Because your sister deserves peace, not impossible questions." The kindness hidden inside that answer unsettled Emily more than any display of supernatural power could have. Every story she had heard described the vampire king as distant, ruthless, and impossible to understand. Yet standing before her was someone who considered details most people would overlook. As servants quietly entered the chamber, carrying dry clothing and warm blankets, another realization settled over the gathering nobles. The king was not merely honoring the covenant. He was personally arranging for Emily's comfort. A young servant respectfully offered her a folded navy sweater and comfortable trousers. Emily accepted them with grateful hands, embarrassed by the attention. Before following the attendants toward the guest wing, she turned back one final time. Lucian had returned to the base of the throne, speaking quietly with his council, but for a brief moment their eyes met across the vast chamber. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. Somewhere beyond words, an invisible thread now connected their futures. Hidden behind one of the marble columns, however, a noblewoman dressed in emerald silk watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Her fingers tightened around an antique silver ring as she whispered almost silently, "If the prophecy has truly begun, then the human cannot be allowed to remain here for long." Morning arrived quietly over Blackthorn Castle, not with the sound of birds or busy streets, but with pale silver light spilling through towering windows that overlooked endless forests wrapped in mist. Emily opened her eyes inside a guest room larger than her entire apartment back home. The bed beneath her felt impossibly soft, and thick velvet curtains swayed gently, although every window remained closed. For a brief moment she forgot where she was. Then the silver mark on her wrist caught the morning light, and every memory returned at once. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door opened just enough for a young maid to step inside carrying a breakfast tray filled with fresh fruit, warm bread, herbal tea, and honey. She appeared no older than Emily, with dark hair neatly tied behind her shoulders and a polite smile that seemed almost surprised to exist inside such a solemn castle. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said softly. "My name is Anna. His Majesty requested that I assist you during your stay." Emily quickly stood. "Thank you, but you do not have to serve me. I can carry my own tray." Anna blinked as though she had misheard. "I know you can," she answered after a moment. "But it is my responsibility." Emily smiled warmly. "Then maybe we can share breakfast instead." The young maid froze completely. No guest had ever spoken to her that way. She glanced nervously toward the hallway before shaking her head. "That is not permitted." Emily looked at the untouched tray. "Then at least sit with me for a minute." Anna hesitated so long that Emily almost apologized. Finally, she quietly accepted the invitation, sitting only on the very edge of a chair. They spoke about simple things. The weather, favorite books, life before the castle. Emily learned that Anna had not visited her family in almost 3 years because they lived hundreds of miles away. Before leaving, Emily quietly slipped one warm dinner roll into Anna's hands. "You barely ate," Anna whispered. Emily smiled. "You looked hungrier than I am." Tears almost reached the maid's eyes before she hurried from the room. Unseen by either woman, an elderly butler standing outside had witnessed the entire exchange. He remained silent for several seconds, before quietly walking toward the royal library. Nearly an hour later, Emily followed another servant through galleries filled with paintings, antique clocks, and enormous shelves of books older than the United States itself. Everything inside the castle reflected wealth accumulated over centuries, yet none of it felt boastful. It felt preserved. as though every object carried a memory someone refused to lose. As they approached a sunlit courtyard at the center of the castle, Emily heard laughter. The sound surprised her more than anything else she had experienced since arriving. Children were playing beside a marble fountain. Most looked perfectly ordinary except for their unusually pale complexions and elegant clothing. One little boy sat alone beneath an oak tree, carefully arranging carved wooden animals across the stone bench. While the others ran past him, none invited him to join their games. Emily slowed her steps. The servant beside her noticed immediately. "That is Prince Adrian," he explained quietly. "He prefers solitude." Emily watched the child for another moment. It did not look like preference. It looked like loneliness. She gently excused herself and walked toward the bench. Kneeling beside the little prince, she picked up one tiny carved fox that had rolled onto the ground. "I think he was trying to escape," she said with a playful smile, placing it back beside the others. Adrian looked up cautiously. His bright gray eyes met hers, and after a long pause, the corners of his mouth lifted into the smallest smile. Hidden behind an upper balcony, King Lucian observed the scene without announcing his presence. Beside him stood the silver-haired advisor. "She does not know who he is," the advisor murmured. Lucian watched as Emily patiently listened while the little prince proudly explained each wooden animal in his collection. "No," Lucian answered quietly. "She only knows he is a child sitting alone." The king remained silent for several more moments before adding words that surprised even himself. "And somehow, that makes all the difference." The afternoon sun drifted across the castle gardens, casting long ribbons of golden light over ancient stone paths and quiet fountains. Emily had completely lost track of time while sitting beside Prince Adrian beneath the old oak tree. The little prince spoke softly, almost as if he was afraid louder words might disappear before reaching another person. One by one, he introduced every carved wooden animal resting on the bench. The fox was adventurous. The owl remembered everything. The little horse was afraid of storms, but always kept walking anyway. Emily listened to every story with genuine interest, asking questions that made the boy smile a little wider each time. She noticed how carefully he chose his words, how often he glanced toward the castle before speaking, and how surprised he seemed whenever someone actually listened. "Did you make these?" she asked, holding the tiny owl in her hand. Adrian nodded proudly. "My grandfather taught me." "Your grandfather must be very patient." The boy smiled. "He says patient people hear things that loud people never notice." Emily laughed softly. "I think he is right." Hidden several balconies above, Lucian remained exactly where he had been for nearly 20 minutes. He had intended to return to council business after observing only a few moments, yet something kept him there. There was no ceremony in Emily's kindness. She did not speak differently because the child carried royal blood. She did not flatter him or attempt to earn favor. She simply treated Adrian the same way she would have treated Lily years ago. The silver-haired advisor folded his hands behind his back. "The prince has not remained with a stranger this long since the queen mother passed away." Lucian answered without taking his eyes from the garden. "She asks nothing from him. Perhaps that is exactly why he trusts her." Before Lucian could respond, another figure entered the courtyard from the opposite side. The noblewoman dressed in emerald silk approached with graceful confidence, her elegant smile never quite reaching her eyes. Lady Vivian Ashcroft had been one of the most influential members of the royal court for decades. She stopped several feet from the bench and addressed Emily politely. "Miss Carter, I hope the castle has been comfortable." Emily immediately stood. "Everyone has been very kind." Vivian glanced briefly toward Adrian before returning her attention to Emily. "His Majesty has always been generous to unexpected guests." The words sounded pleasant, but something beneath them felt carefully measured. Emily smiled anyway. "I am grateful for everything." Vivian's gaze drifted toward the silver mark on Emily's wrist. For the briefest instant, her expression changed. Curiosity became concern. Concern became calculation. Then the smile returned as though nothing had happened. "If you ever require assistance," she said, "please come to me before troubling the king. His responsibilities are considerable." Emily nodded politely. "I understand." After the noblewoman disappeared into the castle, Adrian quietly leaned closer. "She does not like surprises." Emily looked at him with gentle amusement. "How can you tell?" The little prince shrugged. "She smiles with her mouth, but not with her eyes. Emily almost laughed before realizing the child had spoken with complete sincerity. Later that evening, Lucian sat alone inside the royal library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes older than entire nations. Candlelight flickered across towering shelves while the silver-haired advisor placed a weathered manuscript upon the large oak table. Its cracked cover bore the same intertwined branches and tiny star that marked Emily's wrist. Lucian slowly opened the fragile pages. Ancient illustrations filled the parchment alongside faded writing in a language almost forgotten. One sentence, however, had been carefully translated centuries earlier by royal scholars. The advisor read it aloud in a hushed voice. "When the mark of truth awakens, the chosen heart shall speak without deception, and the ancient throne shall remember what the kingdom has forgotten." Lucian remained silent. His fingers rested lightly upon the page as countless possibilities unfolded within his mind. At that exact moment, somewhere else inside the castle, Emily stood beside her bedroom window watching the first evening stars appear above the mountains. The silver mark on her wrist shimmered faintly for just an instant, before fading once again, as though responding to something neither of them yet understood. The following morning, a quiet sense of routine had already begun to settle over Blackthorn Castle, but beneath its polished halls and graceful traditions, invisible currents were shifting. Emily noticed them almost immediately. Servants who had smiled at her the day before now exchanged uncertain glances whenever she passed. Conversations paused as she approached and resumed only after she had disappeared around another corner. No one treated her with disrespect, yet she could feel the castle holding its breath. After breakfast, Anna hurried into the sitting room carrying a folded letter sealed with dark blue wax. Her cheeks glowed with excitement. "Miss Carter, this arrived from Saint and Community Hospital." Emily accepted the envelope with trembling hands. She broke the seal so quickly that the paper almost slipped from her fingers. The letter was brief, but every sentence changed the air around her. Lily's fever had broken before sunrise. Her breathing had stabilized. The strange episodes of confusion had completely stopped. The physicians could not explain the sudden improvement, only that every test showed remarkable progress. Emily read the letter twice before pressing it gently against her heart. Tears blurred the ink, but this time they were tears of relief. "She is getting better," she whispered. Anna smiled so brightly that she nearly laughed. "I knew His Majesty would keep his promise." Emily looked toward the tall windows where morning sunlight poured across the marble floor. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to believe that everything might truly end well. Later that afternoon, she wandered through the royal library, searching for a book Adrian had mentioned about woodland animals. Endless shelves stretched toward painted ceilings, their leather bindings carrying centuries of knowledge. As she reached for a volume resting slightly above eye level, another hand lifted it effortlessly before she could. Lucian stood beside the shelf, placing the book gently into her hands. "You were looking for this." Emily smiled. "Thank you." They walked slowly between towering shelves in comfortable silence until Lucian finally spoke. "The hospital sent good news." Emily looked at him in surprise. "You already know?" "The castle receives updates." His expression remained calm, but there was quiet satisfaction in his voice. "Your sister continues to recover." Emily stopped walking. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." Lucian regarded her thoughtfully before answering. "You already are." She frowned slightly. "By staying here?" "By keeping your word." His gaze settled briefly on the silver mark beneath her wrist. "Truth is rarer than gratitude." Emily nodded. "Then I will continue telling you the truth." A faint smile almost appeared before disappearing again. "I believe you will." Neither of them noticed the figure standing silently behind a distant row of bookshelves. Lady Vivian watched the conversation through a narrow gap between ancient volumes, her expression growing more troubled with every passing moment. She quietly slipped away before either of them sensed her presence. That evening, the royal council assembled inside a circular chamber beneath the castle. Candles burned around a great stone table carved with symbols older than the kingdom itself. Vivian rose from her seat with unusual urgency. "Your Majesty," she began, "the human has already begun influencing the household." Several council members looked toward her. She continued calmly. "Servants speak more freely." The young prince smiles again. Even the castle staff have begun questioning customs that have remained unchanged for generations. One elder answered quietly, "Those are hardly crimes." Vivian folded her hands. "No, but change rarely announces which direction it intends to travel." Lucian listened without interruption until the chamber fell silent. Finally, he spoke. "Compassion does not weaken a kingdom." His steady voice echoed beneath the stone ceiling. "Fear does." No one answered. Yet as the meeting concluded, the oldest council member remained seated, studying a weathered map spread across the table. At its center rested an illustration of the ancient throne surrounded by 12 silver stars. One of those stars had begun to glow faintly, although no hand had touched the parchment for hundreds of years. The old scholar slowly lifted his eyes toward the dark ceiling and whispered words that no one else remained to hear. "The throne has started remembering." 3 days later, the first snow of the season drifted quietly over Blackthorn Castle, covering the ancient towers in a blanket of white that softened even the darkest stone. Emily stood beneath the grand balcony wrapped in a warm navy coat the castle servants had insisted she keep, watching delicate snowflakes settle across the silent gardens. She had just finished speaking with the physicians at St. and Community Hospital. Lily was smiling again. She had eaten a full breakfast, laughed with one of the nurses, and asked when her sister would finally come home. Every word had lifted another weight from Emily's heart. For the first time in months, tomorrow no longer felt frightening. As she slipped the phone into her pocket, she heard steady footsteps approaching across the marble terrace. Lucian joined her beneath the falling snow, his black coat moving gently in the winter breeze. Neither of them spoke immediately. They simply watched the quiet landscape together while the castle bells marked another peaceful afternoon. "Your sister continues to improve," Lucian said at last. Emily nodded, unable to hide her smile. "Because you kept your promise." Lucian looked toward the snow-covered mountains. "No, because you believed someone worth saving was more important than yourself." Emily considered those words carefully. "I thought I came here to rescue Lily." Lucian slowly turned toward her. "Perhaps you did." His silver eyes reflected the pale winter sky. "But every choice creates another story." Before Emily could ask what he meant, the heavy doors leading from the council wing opened. The silver-haired advisor approached with measured steps, carrying an ancient wooden box carved with the familiar symbol of intertwined branches surrounding a single star. He bowed respectfully before speaking. "Your Majesty, the archives have confirmed the final translation." Lucian accepted the weathered document resting inside the box. He read only a single page before closing it again. Emily noticed something unusual. For the first time since meeting him, the king appeared genuinely surprised. "What is it?" she asked softly. Lucian remained silent for several moments before answering. "The covenant did not begin because you offered your future." Emily frowned. "Then why did it begin?" The king met her eyes with complete honesty. "Because you never asked for anything for yourself." A quiet breeze carried fresh snow between them. The advisor continued gently. "According to the oldest records, the mark of truth appears only when a ruler encounters a heart untouched by selfish ambition. It cannot be summoned. It cannot be inherited. It simply chooses." Emily instinctively looked down at the silver mark beneath her wrist. It shimmered once beneath the winter light before fading again. "I am just an ordinary waitress," she whispered. Lucian shook his head almost imperceptibly. Ordinary people rarely change ancient kingdoms. Before another word could be spoken, the great bronze bell echoed once across the castle grounds. This time it was answered by a second bell from the oldest tower. Then a third. One after another, every bell within Blackthorn Castle began ringing together, their voices rolling across the mountains like a song forgotten for centuries. Servants paused where they stood. Children looked toward the towers. Even the royal council stepped onto the balconies in stunned silence. Deep beneath the castle, hidden beyond locked doors no living person had opened in generations, the ancient throne released a soft silver glow that illuminated 12 carved stars surrounding its base. One empty place remained at its center, waiting. Lucian looked toward the distant tower, as though hearing words no one else could understand. Then, without ceremony or hesitation, he turned back toward Emily. "Your covenant with me will end when your sister returns home healthy." Emily smiled with quiet relief. "Then I will finally be free." Lucian's expression warmed ever so slightly. Perhaps. Snow continued falling between them, peaceful and unhurried. Neither of them noticed that the silver mark upon Emily's wrist and the matching mark hidden beneath Lucian's sleeve shone together for a single heartbeat before fading once more, as though the ancient magic itself understood a truth they had not yet discovered. Sometimes the greatest bargains do not change fate because of what is given away. They change the world because they reveal a heart that refuses to stop choosing kindness.